Thanks to the mysterious time rings of the Kais, Goku Black has the ability to travel back in time. But what is the mystery behind the time ring? Well, on this video, Herms joins me as we try to unravel this puzzle. If you love pro wrestling and want to have a good laugh, check out my classic pro wrestling podcast, the K-Fabulous Lucha Brothers. Subscribe on iTunes, and I'll leave the link down below. Herms, it seems like we talk every week about this damn show.
Seemingly.
That's okay, though. I always enjoy it. So let's talk about Dragon Ball Super, the time ring, and the mystery behind it here. So in Dragon Ball Super episode 50, there was a lot of exposition. You had translated the information about how the time ring belongs to the Kais, to the Supreme Kais in the dub, the Kaioshin, so to speak. What's interesting is the rules of these time rings seem to be something. I mean, this is a brand new thing. This guy Black's running around with all kinds of Kaioshin jewelry. He's got Poltaras. He's got the time ring.
So Trunks' time machine is said to create time distortions as it goes through time. And then it's said that the time ring reacts to these distortions and allows Black to follow after the path that the time machine took, which is how Black is able to follow Trunks into the present.
Yes, and then he follows him to the present, but there's a twist because we find out that the time distortion that Trunks created is only a temporary temporal vortex, so to speak. In other words, after some time, the portal closes, correct?
Yes, it's said that it returns to normal the same way that a wound heals. So then when it does return to normal, then the time ring reacted to that and forcibly drew Black back into the future that he came from.
This reminds me of the theory in Back to the Future Part 2 about when old Biff goes back in time to change the timeline. And I remember when he went back in time and he came back to the future, you see him kind of like in pain because he's disappearing. He's being erased from existence. Same thing even in Back to the Future Part 1 where Marty prevents his dad from meeting his mom temporarily and his family in the future starts to disappear. It's almost as if time is kind of catching up, so to speak, and that's why the portal's closing. Does that make sense?
Kinda. We still don't have too much information, but I mean, so in the episode Whis, he gives this whole explanation about, the time distortions healing like a wound, but then after this, he's like, in other words, he ran out of time. Like he had a time limit. He could only stay in the present, as we'd call, from our perspective, the present for a certain amount of time before being flung back to the future.
So no matter what, the portal would not have closed without him. He would have gone through no matter what. In other words, it wasn't one of those things where the portal closed and he would have been stuck in the past. He would have just flown right back. He does not belong in the past or in the present?
I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but it seems like, at least as long as he's got the ring on, it seems like the ring would force him to go back to his original time zone.
Yes. Now, that, of course, begs the question, which you had actually brought up as well on your Twitter, which is twitter.com/Herms98. You brought up that time rings are only supposed to let you go into the future and return to the present time, which, of course, we talked about, and the series has talked about the consequences of time travel. It's been talked about in Jocko the Galactic Patrolman, not just the manga, but also in the, his stuff he said in the series, as well as from Whis in episodes 48 and 50. Or was that 49? I think it was 49 and 50, where he talks about the butterfly effect and changing the past, about how gods are forbidden from going into the past, but the time ring can only go into the past if Trunks or some other form of time travel mechanism opens the portal and then the time ring reacts, correct?
I mean, that seems to be what we're told from this episode, but I mean, obviously when we talk about the past, the present, the future, it's all relative to where you're starting.
Yeah,
but so
exactly.
What Whis says is that, okay, first off, the time ring, as you kind of mentioned, it's supposed to be like only, according to Whis, only the Kaioshin, the Supreme Kais, only they are allowed to use it. Exactly who is allowing them to use it isn't clear at this point.
I guess the Omni King, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Buck stops with him, I guess. But anyway, from some higher authority is telling these gods what they can and can't do, and so they are the only ones allowed to use it. But even then, only to a limited extent, because as Whis says, they can use the time ring to go into their future and then return from that future to their present, but they can't go further back into the past than when they started. In other words, they can't go into their own. They can return to where they started, but can't go into their past because he says, even among the gods, going into the past is forbidden.
Now, that brings up two questions. Number one, because I haven't seen the sub version as of this recording. By the time most people watch this video, I probably have seen it. But one question or two questions. Number one, does Whis at all state why the Kais would even need to go into the future? Is there a purpose for this?
No, he doesn't explain why.
And then the second question is, which you may not have an answer, and I don't know if I do either, is as far as going into the future and then coming back to the present, is it another timeline or is it the same timeline? Because the thing that I'm concerned about is that Super might take the timeline theory from Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, the manga Dragon Ball Z, the anime, and just tear it to shreds, because the idea is that you cannot change the past. If you go back in time, you can only go back in time and create a new timeline. You can't go back in time within your own timeline.
Well, you can go to the past, but when you go to the past and change something, it will create a different timeline splitting off from that point.
Absolutely.
So I guess the question is, with that in mind, it's not really clear what happens. So if you go to the past and change things, it creates a new timeline. But it's never really been said what happens if you go to the future. So, it would seem like from a certain perspective, obviously the future is going to be the past from even further in the future. It's all relative. It seems like in that view, like if every future is just the past of another point in time, then going into the future and changing something should create another timeline just as much as going into your past. But on the other hand, they could just say that as far as the rules of this fictional world, going into the future and changing things might not create a timeline, even though it seems like it logically should.
Is Toriyama changing his mind about stuff again? Is that what you think?
Yeah. Well, we're told at this point that they're allowed to go to the future but not the past, and the reason why they're not allowed to go to the past is they haven't really mentioned splitting timelines in Super yet, but they have mentioned the whole kind of the butterfly effect thing, where if you go and change something, then it can have all sorts of crazy effect. Yeah, all sorts of crazy unforeseen consequences. So, which again is kind of the same thing where it's like logically going into the future and changing something would also create unintended consequences. So it's not clear why the past should be special in that regard. But
I agree with that. Now,
so as it's being presented to us so far, it seems like there's some not necessarily logical, but there's some difference. It's for whatever reason, going into the future is just treated as being okay, whereas going to the past is the dangerous thing. So
all I can think of is that maybe the Kais can go to the future to observe, but not do anything, and maybe observe and report, and that's it. But of course, if like with anything in this fictional world or in any fictional world, if something falls into the wrong hands, it could be dangerous. Now, you had stated a couple things I want to talk about here. You said it's established that Black can't go back in time anymore because the ring can only follow Trunks. That goes back to what we talked about a minute ago about how Trunks' time machine has to create the temporal vortex and the ring has to follow.
That's the implication. So Whis says that. He says that it doesn't seem that it doesn't seem like Black can probably come back now that there's no distortion created by the time machine. So it's not entirely set in stone, but that does seem to be how it works.
Now that of course goes into the next question we're trying to figure this out is because we have with Dragon Ball, I feel like just when you think you've got all the answers, they change the questions. With the whole mystery of Black, in the episode, Black stated, in this body, I'm glad I could fight you, or something to that extent, which of course implies that the body that looks like Kakarot is not his real body. Either some people have theorized, Herms, that the heart virus took a physical form, or that somebody took Goku's corpse from that timeline and messed around with it, did some reanimator zombie shit, and brought it back and made it evil. Because of the rules of the time ring, Black originates from a time earlier than Trunks' future, or he's doing forbidden stuff by using his ring to go back in time. So the one thing I know people are going to jump on right now is the theory that when Champa got his Earth back, that somebody on that Earth who became Black, I don't know, maybe, took the Kaioshin time ring from Universe 6 and hopped into the future. But what I'm having trouble understanding, Herms, is how did they know to go to Trunks' timeline? Why not go into their own future? Why did they go to the future into Trunks' future as opposed to their own timeline?
At this point, we don't know if anyone has gone into anyone's future yet, so who knows. But yeah, so since we've been told that you can't use a time ring to go to the past, then since Black does seem to go to the past, then well, how could he do that? And so, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's not entirely clear if it's physically impossible to use the ring to go to the past, or if it's just against the law, essentially. So if it's just like a rule, if it's just like a law, then maybe Black, if he's a bad guy, doesn't care about breaking the law, so he just does whatever he wants with it. Or at the same time, if it's an unbreakable law of nature that you can't go to the past, then maybe he originates from some time earlier than Trunks' future and use the ring to go to that future. But who knows why he would? There's still no way of knowing why he would have done that.
There's still a few unanswered questions.
And I guess the other thing, of course, is that as it's indicated, it doesn't seem like going to the past with the ring is. It seems like he can't. Well, okay, Whis says that it doesn't seem like he can at will go to the past with the ring, and he has to rely on the time machine leaving those distortions for him to follow. So that could just be how he gets around the rule against going to the past. He can only do it if he's following after someone with a time machine.
Yes, because the vortex has to be created in order for him to take advantage of it. Everybody check out Herms, twitter.com/Herms98. Of course, KANZENSHUU.com. You can talk to Herms on the board there whenever he posts stuff. And is there any other information that we can gather about this ring thing?
So it seems clear from all this talk about only the time machine creating distortions and the ring needing to follow those. It seems like even though both of these items are used to travel in time, it seems like they must time travel using some different principles. Like they don't necessarily time travel in the same way. So it could be that, it might be that even though in the main series we're told that Trunks' time machine, creates these splintering timelines, maybe because the time ring works on different time travel principles.
Right.
But yeah, maybe it doesn't split off just because, somehow it travels differently, which for whatever made-up sci-fi reason doesn't have the same time splintering effects. Or who knows?
This is supposed to be a kid's show, and we're grown men trying to figure this out. So again, thank you, Herms. Anything else?
I guess nothing. Just hopefully this will at least make more sense than time travel in Doctor Who.
I'm not even touching that one. We'll catch you down the road.